Hello friends, welcome back to A Ham Like Me. Sorry it's been a bit of a delay since my last video, a couple of weeks. In fact, I've been busy here in the shack operating. And the reason I'm doing that is that I've had to change the configuration of the way that the shack was laid out, including some of the radios that I will include in a radio that I took out. And more on that in just a few minutes. But one of the things that I sort of discovered over the last few weeks of using the equipment here in the shack is that there was a little too much of it. I prefer to have a bit of a simpler approach when it comes to radios and operating, and it was a little crowded here and a little bit convoluted. I think I was trying to accomplish too much in one 5-foot space. So I've pared it down. I have the ICOM IC7100 still here. I also have the Kenwood TS520 still here, along with the amplifier. I've been operating primarily CW, and most of my CW work is with a straight key. I have the straight key here on the desk. It's a Chinese straight key. It's not very expensive. In fact, the kind person who sold me the Kenwood included this key with it. But it works fine as a straight key. Not the best, not the worst, but it gets the job done. Now, with that being said, the functionality of both the ICOM on the Kenwood and the Kenwood is great. The ICOM is a little bit more user-friendly for CW as a radio, simply because the filtering is narrower. And it's also a radio that allows me to adjust how wide the filtering is, meaning in a crowded CW world, like there was, for example, this past weekend, we had the RTTY contest that was going on, as well as a SKCC event called the Weekend Sprint. And that's a once-a-month event that's held by the SKCC, or the Straight Key Century Club, of which I'm a member. So having a really narrow filter was nice, because I could really kind of zone in on those CW signals without having to listen to a lot of adjacent signals that would be bleeding through. Now, I also operated the Kenwood exclusively this weekend, and the Kenwood doesn't have that feature. It has a built-in CW filter, but it's not very narrow. I think it's 500 kc. Or KAH, I'm sorry, kilohertz. We also have the Cantronics filter up here, which works on the audio output of the radio to narrow it down. And it's pretty effective. It worked really surprisingly well. It's a bit touchy, meaning that the amount of turn in the dial, both bandwidth and the frequency, has a very large effect on the output. In addition, with a set of headphones that I often wear when I'm operating CW, the headphone jack in the back of the Cantronics only gives me one ear in the headphones. And I think it's because of the adapter. This is actually a gaming headset that I use for CW, but they're comfortable and they're cheap and they work pretty well. However, when I plug in the adapter, because it's got a 1/4-inch jack in the back of the Cantronics, as does the front of the 520, I only have one ear. I've got 2 ears on the 520, but only one ear on the Cantronics. And that's a little tricky to listen to CW into one ear. It works for the short term, but it's not a long-term solution. So I think I need a different adapter. These are things that come about. There's insights. As you go and build your shack and use your radios, you kind of figure out, this works, this doesn't work, this is too complex, this is just, what I wanted to do. So I don't have the TS450S in the shack any longer. I decided to use that just strictly as a portable radio. I wasn't using it. I was using the TS520 this past weekend, for example. There were bonus points for tubes. Well, I have tubes in this radio, so I was giving bonus points to other stations by using this radio, which has tubes in it. And it was very effective, and I like using it that way. Also, the 7100, with those two radios, I can do everything I need to do and want to do at this time. Digital, CW, SSB, operate pretty much anywhere on the band. Now, the Kenwood does not have 6 meters or 160 meters. It's limited 10 to 80, but that's okay. that's all right for this radio, and for what I use it for, that's fine. The ICOM IC7100, of course, is 70 centimeters all the way through 160 meters. It covers all bands, all modes. So it's a little bit more versatile. But of course, it's newer. And by the way, I'm not sponsored by any companies. Okay, I've purchased all of this equipment on my own. I have no sponsorships from anybody. This is just my own personal equipment. As far as the computer goes, everything worked out just fine. I have SKCC Logger hooked up. One thing that I had hooked up to the computer a few weeks ago, and I mentioned, was a receive antenna and an SDR dongle for being able to have a nice waterfall, pretty waterfall up on the screen. Certainly makes finding stations that are transmitting a good deal easier, or a good bit easier. However, I use Linux as my operating system, and the choices for software-defined radio software, or SDR software, Cubic SDR is one, there's a couple others, they don't provide the functions that I want. Specifically muting functions, and I'll put it this way. When a receive loop antenna is in the same general vicinity as the transmitting antenna, there is always some bleed through that occurs. Even though I have a switch on the SDR, which disconnects the receive antenna whenever I'm transmitting on any of my other antennas, inevitably signals bleed through. And the Linux SDR software doesn't recover very quickly, I have found. When I transmit, even at 50 watts, for example, the SDR software, of course, sees and hears my signal. Even though the antenna shuts off, this is a residential neighborhood, and none of this equipment is separated very much. And it doesn't recover. The Windows-based SDR softwares seem to recover very quickly. That is, you hear your signal come through and see it on the screen, and then as soon as you stop transmitting, you're instantly, or very nearly instantly, receiving on the SDR again. There's very little delay between that switchover between transmitting and receiving. There's a little bit of a delay, but not much. On Cubic SDR and some of the other software, it's a very long delay. It takes a long time for the receive to recover in the software. So unfortunately, when I transmit and then stop transmitting, I want to be able to hear. But it's almost 4 seconds before I can hear again through the SDR software. Anyway, long story short, no more SDR. I'm going to take down the receive loop. I'm going to go just with my radios for reception, without a waterfall. Maybe later, maybe at some point I can upgrade and be able to have a nice waterfall with a fancy SDR type radio that has an output for a waterfall, perhaps. We'll see. But at this point, we're going to leave things alone. And that brings me to antennas. First of all, I've simplified all of this, but second of all, you may notice as well, there's a little box up here that wasn't here last time we spoke, and that's a tuner. This is an antenna tuner. And I know I said earlier, I wanted to focus primarily on resonant antennas. I like resonant antennas. You don't need a tuner. If the antenna is built properly, you can run legal limit power through it without too much difficulty. I mean, these are good things. However, in reality, and we'll take a walk outside and I'll explain what I'm talking about in a few minutes, having one antenna deployed that I can use with a tuner to work multiple frequencies, multiple bands within the amateur radio spectrum is awfully handy. It's convenient, and I gotta say, it's a simpler way to go. Now, me being who I am, I'm not going to take the simple way out. I have a 40-meter double bazooka dipole that's already deployed. I've also deployed another antenna outside, which is a long wire, and we'll show you that in a few minutes. Plus, I have some other resonant antennas that I'd like to put up in the air. So we're going to do a combination of things. I'm going to keep my one antenna, a long wire, with a tuner, and then we're going to throw a few resonant antennas in the mix and see how that works out. And I'll keep operating, and I'll definitely make some more videos. So stand by. We're going to head outside in just a minute and talk antennas. All right, here we are outside on a very unusually warm day for February in the Midwest. Don't worry though, snow will be falling again in a few days. But for now, we have practically t-shirt weather. Anyway, so here's the business end of our multi-band antenna. This is a long wire antenna. It's an inverted L configuration. This wire, I know it's a little hard to see on camera. This is the radiating element of the antenna. This wire stretches up into a tree about 35 feet and then out like an upside down L for the rest of its length. This wire is 114 feet long from this point to the end, which is way on the other side of the house. It has one counterpoise wire that comes out, is attached here to this unun. The counterpoise wire just runs along the ground. It's 43 feet long. So the radiator is 114 feet. The counterpoise is 43 feet. This is a 9-to-1 unun made by Palomar Engineers, encased in a nice watertight plastic box. I'm not sponsored by Palomar. I purchased this with my own money. This is also a legal limit unun, meaning it can handle up to, what does it say on here? 1500 watts PEP. So it's pretty, pretty good. Oops. It just fell down there for a second. Also, it's got, of course, coax, which comes in this end. And then the coax runs about 25 feet over to the shack window. And you've seen the pass-through on the other side. So this is tunable on 10 meters through 160 meters with a tuner, obviously. And it works pretty well. There's a little bit of efficiency loss in the unun, but not much. It's really not bad. It works pretty darn well, all things considered. Let's go take a look at one of my other antennas. All right, I'm back. I'm outside now at my residence, and you're looking at a few wraps of coax in the tree. This piece of coax here goes to my 40-meter double bazooka dipole. It's hung in an inverted V fashion, like this, with an apex about 30 feet up in a tree that's on the other side of the camera. And the reason I'm not showing you where the apex is, the low angle of the winter sun is right behind the antenna. And if I turn the camera to the antenna, you'll see nothing but a big sun blot. You won't be able to see any of it. Suffice it to say that this wire, this piece of coax, goes up to the 40-meter inverted V double bazooka dipole. It's a commercial antenna. It's made by Radio Waves. Once again, I'm not sponsored, purchased with my own money. I really like their double bazooka dipoles, especially in the inverted V configuration. I've had great success with this antenna. Not only will it work on 40 meters, but being a dipole cut for the 40-meter band, it can also operate fairly well on 15 meters. In fact, I can just touch it up a little bit with the tuner and it works just fine. In the CW portion of 15 meters, even without a tuner, my SWR is about 1.5 or 1.6 to 1, which is perfectly acceptable. Now, the reason I'm filming back this way, number one, I don't want to point the camera into the sun, but the other reason is that I have an MFJ remote antenna switch hanging up here in the tree. Now, there's nothing connected to it at the moment because I only have one antenna out in this part of the yard. However, what I'd like to do is hook up the 40-meter antenna to this switch and then also deploy my 20-meter antenna here in the yard, somewhere in the vicinity of the 40. That way, I have a relatively short piece of coax that goes up to the 40-meter antenna, and then I'll have a relatively short piece of coax that can run to the 20-meter antenna. Now, where that's going to be deployed, I'm not entirely sure yet, and I'll see if I can show you why. It might be tough to film, but let me see if I can do it. Here, I'll give you some perspective first. Right above this switch, which is just hanging on this tree trunk, is a power line. And that power line runs this way, east to west. from the street through the middle, basically bisects my backyard, and then down the alley. And off of that, there's a line that feeds the house. You can see the garage to my house right behind me. So I have electrical lines on the street, north to south, through the backyard, east to west. And then another line that feeds the house, south to north. I'm boxed in. Now, the electric company was supposed to bury this line. Let's see if I can get it on film. There's the pole. And you can see the line right up here. The electrical company said they were going to bury that at some point. Trench. Go underground and put this electrical line underground. Leave the pole up, of course, to feed my house. But it's been a year, more than a year, and I haven't heard anything from them. I don't know if the project has failed or stalled. Who knows? In any event, there's a lot of excess coax here hanging on the tree. You could see it. There's a reason for that, as I bought a couple of pieces of coax that were about 100 feet, because it's roughly 100 feet from my shack pass-through, the window pass-through, around the house, up to the eave, across between the garage and this tree. So if I can bring one piece of coax to the switch and have two antennas running off the switch, then it will save me a length of coax. This one can be much shorter because all it has to do is run from the switch up to the 40-meter antenna. In fact, I'll cut this one in half. I'll use half to run to the 40-meter antenna and the other half from the switch to the 20-meter antenna, wherever that goes. Now, we're expecting some cold weather, so I don't think I'm going to get a chance to put the 20-meter antenna out. But my thinking is this. The long wire antenna is tunable basically 10 through 160 meters. It's really convenient. It's really easy to use. If I had to have just one antenna on the property, that would be the antenna. I can throw a line up in a tree with my throw bag, get the wire up there, find another tree, throw a line up in there for the other end, and it's deployed. It takes maybe 15 to 20 minutes to put that antenna up, as long as I have a couple of points that are reasonably high up off the ground. The dipole takes a little bit more because it needs an apex, and then of course it has two legs that come out, and those two legs have to be supported or tied off, so there's some tension on them, and they have to be angled roughly in a straight manner. You can also do it just as a standard dipole as well, but the feed point's a little heavy, so you kind of need 3 points of contact if you want to deploy that dipole in a nice, level, strong fashion. In any event, my plan is this. This dipole will be 40 meters and 15 meters. I'll have another dipole I'll put up, the double bazooka, for 20. And then I will have the long wire, which is already deployed, for pretty much everything else. Now here's the other thing. Let me grab the camera. That is a receive loop antenna. That is the receive loop antenna that goes, that's right now, that used to feed my SDR, my RTL SDR dongle. It's on a 20-foot mast, and it has a rotator. Well, if I'm not using the SDR dongle anymore, I think that's the perfect place for either a 6-meter Moxon or a 10-meter Moxon. What do you think? So let me know in the comments below. I'm going to lose my glasses here. 40 meter, 15 on one dipole, 20 meters on another dipole. The long wire for pretty much everything else. And then a mast with a rotator for a Moxon, or perhaps a beam, 6 meters or 10 meters. We're coming in. 10 meters is pretty good. And the long wire will work on 10 meters, but it's not that efficient. I think a dedicated Moxon antenna on a rotator for 10 meters would just be the bomb. That would be the way to go. So tell me what you think. I hope you enjoyed this video, this series that I'm doing on rebuilding my ham shack and redeploying antennas and doing other things like that. Please like and subscribe if you have an opportunity to do so. It's free, doesn't cost you a thing. It really does help out the channel. And I'll try and get a few more videos out on a more timely basis. My apologies for the delay. I'm Robert, KE0STT. Thanks for watching.